We live in an era of heroes. One day books will be written about them, movies will be made, and the stories of the struggle will be taught in schools. But only they will know the price they had to pay. The war is a struggle for their lives, and each has their own front line, in evacuation trucks, operating rooms, and the war front. Since 2018, Vladyslav has served as a drone operator and combat medic in the AZOV regiment. He says that they made preparations ahead of time for this defense of Mariupol, but it was not possible to foresee what occurred. The city was surrounded within a few days. The Russians systematically destroyed the city lanes and streets with local residents. In a few months, Mariupol turned into a mass grave. According to rough estimates, more than 50,000 of its residents were killed.
What always struck me the most was the deaths of civilians who were killed by Russian Federation, who were killed simply, I don't know, just indiscriminately. They fired with artillery, firefighting systems. They were shooting the area aimlessly. They didn't care if there was someone or not. They have equipment and they use it. I had the feeling that they were just being delivered ammunition and they had to shoot it until more was sent. That's why they didn't even aim. That is one of the most important moments in my life that simply turned my worldview upside down, which now does not allow me to treat the enemy frivolously or forgive them. Because a 16-year-old girl passed away in my arms in Mariupol. At that time, I was at the Mariupol emergency hospital, and I was there with my first injury. I still remember, sometimes I have a nightmare. When a mother with a younger daughter and an older daughter were running to the hospital. But something was wrong with the older daughter. She ran and stumbled in one moment. On the territory of the hospital, when they ran through the gate, they were already supported by nurses, paramedics, who had already dragged them into the hospital to help, but it was too late. It was a piece of rocket salvo from fire system Grad. The Russians just shelled residential areas.
For 3 months, our soldiers continued to hold the defense. There was a shortage of everything: ammunition, medicine, and food. Several times Ukrainian helicopters broke through to Azovstal to bring the guys the most necessary supplies and evacuate the wounded. These brave pilot missions have already made history.
The moment of the millennium that happened for us was when we heard and saw our helicopters flew in and some of our guys arrived. They brought some grenade launchers, some medicines for doctors. These were crazy, brave missions, but they allowed us to hold out a little more, to buy some time for Ukraine. We were on Azovstal, we were in Mariupol, being surrounded by Russians, just defended our land to the last. And during this time it became indecent for other civilized countries not to help us. They saw that we would simply die and would go to the end, but we were trying to buy time for Ukraine in order to get the same HIMARS that helped to deoccupy a certain part of the territory.
From the beginning of the defense, there were 3 hospitals in Azovstal. Already in April there was one, Iron, as the military called it, but the improvised hospital and the surgical instruments were crushed by a Russian aerial bomb.
On that day, we evacuated the wounded in the Azovstal hospital, but unfortunately, he did not survive. There we realized, and the doctors started, that we did not bring the wounded, we brought the body. But I met with the guys who were wounded there, talked to them, everything was fine. They were in good spirits, we continued to work. When we were returning back to our positions to continue the defense, an anti-tank missile hit our group. I remember that I was lying. I had the feeling that I had a tourniquet on my leg. I didn't understand why a tourniquet was there, but a few moments later I realized I didn't have my leg anymore. Doctors cut it off at Azovstal with a Soviet metal saw, a rusty one. In fact, that's cool. Does it work? Yes, it works. Does it cut bones? Yes, it does. Good. As the sergeant said, he wiped it with alcohol, and that's all. Again, it worked. He saved my life. It worked. These people are doctors. They saved many lives without actually having anything. But they did their job, and in many cases it worked.
This happened the day before the extradition procedure, when Ukrainian defenders left the territory of Azovstal. Most of them are still in Russian captivity. Vladyslav was lucky, if it is possible to say so. With a serious injury between life and death, he was taken to a hospital in the occupied territory.
It was the 15th hospital in Donetsk, and there were guards. Among those, mobilized from the territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. There were medical staff who worked there, some of them for many years, even before the war, before 2014. In Donetsk, in fact, they treated my wounds with some herbs and did bandaging. There was an absolute total shortage of everything. Bandages, they were to a deficit. It was a deficit in everything, even in plasters, to fix those bandages. The guys and I joked that there was a Russian greatness in it. There was no toilet paper, even for the guards, you know. I don't know, probably they tore up some books to use them instead of toilet paper.
After a month and a half, Vladyslav got into an exchange list. The Russians gave priority to those who were severely wounded and had minimal chances of survival.
We were taken somewhere. Some said they were taking us to be shot. That was fine. Others said that we were being taken to prison to join other AZOV defenders. Well, that was not bad. I would have seen them. Someone said it was an exchange, but there were one or two people who said, "Oh, what are you worried about? They are taking you for an exchange, probably." In general, we were just going somewhere. Did we have any choice? We were seriously wounded. We were in captivity. Wherever they took us, it was their choice. To be honest, I couldn't get out of the hospital ward. I expected everything. At first, when we were transported, I thought that they would just turn us around. Later, I expected that they would take us to some prison. When I saw that we were already in the Zaporizhia region, we were coming to Zaporizhia city. It was a known place. I was there on training. I was there as a military. It is terrible to see these places under occupation, but still. We realized that the territory under their control would soon end, and territory controlled by Ukrainians would soon be. I saw ambulances and heard our Ukrainian language.
In fact, we became the main outpost in the east of the country, and we believe that this is not just so. This is an experience, this is preparation, which has been going on for almost 9 years till now. Sometimes you go out at night at 2 or 3 a.m. and see 100 ambulances, and you think, is this a movie or is this really something happening on our soil?
Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, 24,000 surgeries were performed in this hospital and transfused were 11,500 tons of blood. The numbers are impressive, but even more impressive is the endurance and courage of the doctors.
I want to say that our military work is 10 points better at providing first aid than in 2014. I bow my hat to them, because in such unsuitable facilities, in tents, in these vehicles, they do the impossible so that our guys can get to the Mechnikov hospital with such serious injuries. I really want everyone to see this. Unfortunately, I understand that no one is allowed to go to the front to see this hell of the first medical care at the first moments.
Since 2014, volunteer medical battalions have been saving lives at the front. Their task is to provide first aid and evacuate the wounded to the hospital. These boys and girls work on a volunteer basis and risk their lives every day.
It is really dangerous, especially when some evacuators drive pickup trucks.
Careful, make sure he doesn't stick out.
Directly at the position or as close to the position, then of course they will be under the shelling. Under the shelling of artillery, mine throwers, rocket salvo fire systems and so on. If it is not an armored vehicle, then ordinary pickup trucks are pierced by shrapnel, as well as cardboard and other things. During my very first rotation, when we were on duty, we were shelled with rocket salvo fire systems at the place of duty. I remember that I was lying near the car. The first shell fell in 50 meters, but lucky that there was ground there. It did not hit the asphalt. The fragments did not fly low and horizontally, but just struck in the ground and blew up. It seemed to me that time had slowed down. I could see these shells falling one by one. Our car was also hit by cluster shells. Thank God we were just lucky that it didn't hit the engine, so that the whole car was damaged. All the car was damaged, wheels were punctured, windows were broken, doors were torn open, but the engine was not hit, that's why it kept running.
Danila graduated Lviv National Army Academy on the second day of the full-scale invasion and immediately went to the front line. He became deputy platoon commander when he was 19.
Adrenaline, war. We were constantly being under Russian Su aircrafts, but they never fired at our positions. They were constantly shooting at the village. There was the training, preparatory process for the guys. They were demonstrated how to work with the combat vehicle, how to use weapons, how to work with grenade launchers. I know all this only as I was just graduating from the academy. I already have it all trained. And that's why I had some kind of authority among the men. They listened to me.
The task set before the platoon was the defense of Kiev. Near Borodyanka, a column of Ukrainian defenders encountered an enemy checkpoint. It turned out that this territory of the Kiev region was already under occupation. In the early days of the invasion, there was a delay in receiving information about the enemy's movement.
I gave the command to my team to make hell for the Russians. But it sounded a little different, and we started to shoot them with everything we had. I was fighting until the tanks started shelling us. The first hit was exactly on my infantry fighting vehicle. I was a few meters away from it already, so I was quite concussed. It completely smashed my helmet with shrapnel, just the harness left. And the shrapnel hit my legs, moreover, I bled a lot. And I started to crawl away a little. I laid down, reloaded my gun, and continued to fight. After some moments, there was another hit by tank. I was hit by shrapnel that broke my left hand and injured one finger at my right. But I reacted quickly with adrenaline in my blood, and maybe it was the training and practice that helped me, you know. And I started to crawl out. I realized that I couldn't fight anymore. I had to save my life at that moment. Right next to my vehicle there was a lone house and metal fence. I crawled to that fence, started to move it, and wobbled. I stood up and just bent it a little bit and fell into the yard.
Wounded Danila spent 2 days there. He had no water, losing consciousness from time to time.
I came to my senses after a while, and I heard Russian voices. They started checking the yards, looking for something or someone. They opened the place and saw me lying on the ground. They pointed guns at me. I raised my hands. They gave me a break to pull out of there. I stood on my knees. I said to shoot me, as I wasn't going to talk to them. And they said, "We're not going to shoot you." I asked them for water, but they said, smiling, that I had to say them first everything I knew. I offended them, and then I lost consciousness again.
A few days later, Danila was transported to the territory of Belarus to a Russian field hospital. Local doctors promised Danila that they would act in accordance with the Geneva Convention.
So I woke up, and all they did was a bandage on my arm, and they put 2 stitches. I have such a big wound here. In general, the muscles were separated. They put a few stitches there to keep it from falling apart. I stayed there for about an hour, and during that hour, according to the Geneva Convention, they put me half naked into the basement. There was nothing, even no beds at all. In one room, while there were not many of us, there were cold beds, also without anything, just springs. And they have already started taking people there. In these 2 weeks or so, 65 people were brought, and only 15 of them were military. The rest were civilians, some guys, young people, old people. They were taken out from the Kiev region. There was a guy who was taken out of the shelter. He was there with his wife and father. And the Russians just took him and beat him, and they kept him. You know, he got frostbite there. They took him out as he had a rusty grandfather's rifle at home, without any components, and even without ammunition.
Wounded, Danila was kept in the basement for 2 weeks without medical care. Moreover, there he received frostbite of the limbs.
I was shivering from the cold all the time. I've always been cold. They gave me thin sweatpants. I had no underwear and a thin sweatshirt. I asked later. Someone from the military police in a couple of days gave me a blanket, but it didn't warm me. It always cold in my back. The food was 3 times a day. It was a little bit of bland macaroni without anything in the morning. In the afternoon I had some porridge or some macaroni too, and a bowl of soup maybe, with some potatoes, if you're lucky, and a couple of cabbages there, and a bread. It was a small piece of bread.
Later, the Ukrainian prisoners were transported to the territory of Russia. Some guards said they were taking them for a pre-trial detention, others said they were taking them to be shot. Danila was lucky. When they arrived and the detention center, the local doctor refused to register him. Together with others seriously wounded, he was taken to a local hospital.
During the period of transportation, I didn't eat or drink for 2 days. Sometimes I didn't eat or drink for a day. More than 2 weeks passed while I was being transported. While I was in the basement, all my limbs frostbite in this basement. My health was taking a significant hit. When I get to this hospital, they accept us. They put us in a ward. In the hospital, some soldiers came into our ward and said that we were going to be sent to another place. The chief doctor was watching us there. I told him, well, look, I will have a blood infection either now or tomorrow. He promised to think about my words. Those guys who were with me were taken to some kind of detention center, and I was left in a hospital. In a few days, they amputated my hand and fingers on my right hand. Simultaneously, they started stitching up shrapnel wounds on my legs. They were already rotten there. A terrible picture. And their feet were frostbitten. Well, they didn't touch them. I stayed there for about a week or 2, and they amputated the phalanx on my toes. I stayed there for a couple more weeks when they transferred me to a military hospital in Kursk. They cut my legs a little more, but I still had my feet. I spent a couple more weeks there. We were informed almost 10 times about the exchange in a day.
As a result, due to inadequate medical care in captivity, Danila had both legs, a hand and 4 fingers amputated. By the way, his former prisoners say they were never visited by representatives of the Red Cross to check the conditions in which the prisoners were held. Their reasoning was a deadly argument. They do not visit because the Russians do not allow access. Instead, Ukrainians' treatment of wounded Russian soldiers meets all the requirements of the Geneva Convention.
I prefer not to talk about it, but we had some guys and we provided all necessary medical care. I remember one young guy, 19 years old. He had injuries to his limbs and was very afraid. He was trembling. When we approached him, we calmed him down. We said we would not do anything bad to him. Just pull out the fragments. The doctor has no right to choose who to help, who not. It is very difficult to think about our guys in captivity, who have a completely different attitude. I was told how they were treated, and unfortunately, after captivity, they lost limbs and health, so that it was impossible to restore it.
Do not be surprised at the attitude of the Russians to the prisoners. They have never spared their own soldiers. And not just on the battlefield. After the war, Soviet cities were flooded with people who were lucky enough to survive at the front, but lost their arms and legs in the battles for their homeland. Homemade carts carrying human stumps, crutches, and prosthetics of war heroes did not fit into the bright socialist everyday life of the country that defeated Nazism. In 1949, before the celebration of the 70th anniversary of Great Stalin, the USSR cities were cleansed of the disabled veterans of the Great Patriotic War. In one night, special detachments of the Soviet People's Militia conducted a raid, took disabled people from the streets and sent them to the train station. They were loaded into cars without heating and sent in trains to Solovki and Valam without trial or investigation. Hundreds of thousands of people who lost their families, homes, apartments, and no money, but had many patriotic ones. The disabled tried to resist, fell on the trucks, but there was nothing they could do. Even people without arms and legs were taken away. In Solovki, they were sometimes taken out to breathe fresh air and hang on ropes or trees. These were 20-year-old boys crippled by the war, but were like a waste material for the great country. Serhii Railian is a professional military man, artilleryman. He has been at the front since 2015. He made the beginning of the full-scale invasion in the Luhansk region. The guys had been at the position for 9 months and were expecting a rotation around the March. However, the situation was different.
We were sent to Solidar to rest. I spent one night there, and the next day they transported us back to Zarychne. It's not far from Liman, near Kremina. In fact, the situation was more difficult there than in Severodonetsk. We were sent there in small groups. We were supposed to be reinforced to other brigades. But it turned out that we were left there alone during the storming of Kremenna, to which Russians were going through our positions. They had concentrated forces there. First of the artillery, for example, we had one howitzer standing there fighting back, and they had 4 or 5 divisions. For comparison, there are about 20-30 cannons in a division. There were a lot of cannons, multiple launch rocket systems, etc. There were too many grabs, smerchs, uragans. There was even a solntsepek. In fact, I had my own plans for that spring. I wasn't supposed to fight at all. Hate, misunderstanding why they do it, and I wish to get rid of this infection as soon as possible.
That day, Serhii and his comrades went on a mission. It was raining heavily. Dirt roads in the vicinity of Liman were washed away, so they had to drive to the side of the road a few meters away enough to blow up an anti-tank mine.
The blow was under my seat, so I was thrown off from the rest of the vehicles. The guys who were more or less okay ran to the nearest position, and they called for help. They reported to the command that such a situation happened. A car was sent from the command observation point to evacuate me. One of the surgeons came running from the position to help. Okay, let's begin from the top. My eye sockets and septum were broken. I still have a little bit of my skull peeking out. The cranial cavity was open, the brain was visible. The eyes were burned out. I didn't have lips at all. There was nothing at all. I have transplants, and what next? A broken spine, a broken pelvis in 2 places, a broken left hip and multi-fragment fracture of the left hip. The left leg was not found. The right leg was hanging on the skin. I can say that I was lucky, because there are too many stories where, unfortunately, guys do not survive when they hit an anti-tank mine. At first I was evacuated to Dnipro.
It was terrible. We didn't sleep till 6 in the morning and talked with Serhii. I heard a man came in and told that they needed to go to the position. Serhii told me they will go and he will be back before lunch. He wasn't back by lunch, he didn't come back in the evening. I was very nervous. In the morning I finally fell asleep and his sister called me. Do you know that Serhii got blown up? Just small information and that's it. About an hour later I received a voice message from his fellows that he lost his leg and a face.
Well, I was informed immediately what was wrong with me. Because I started touching myself, my wife told me everything. I couldn't talk at first because I had a breathing tube. So my wife asked me questions and I nodded yes or no. I wanted to know what was wrong with me. The wife asked, "Do you want to know what's wrong with you?" I am like, yes. And then she told me.
They met on the internet and got married a few months before the full-scale war. Ukrainian soldier and a girl from Belarus. On the first days after his injury, she was with him and became his eyes. Serhii was evacuated from Dnipro to Kiev by helicopter. He spent 20 days in a coma, and then treatment in Odessa, hoping to save at least some of his vision. Now Serhii is undergoing rehabilitation in Kiev and is waiting for prosthetics.
He's not really in pain. He's always pretending.
No.
Are you filming all day today?
Since lunch. Since 12 p.m.
You have a hard job.
Of course. Since 2014, there have been much fewer mine blast injuries. They were such that overturned by special devices. But now we receive about 40 to 50 patients with mine blast injuries every day. It is very hard when a part of the stomach, a part of the back, a limb is torn out. It is very difficult where there is no face. These injuries are incomprehensible to describe. Because when a mother or wife comes here and cannot recognize her own husband or son, it is terrible, but it is the war. The war.
In addition to the total mining of our land, artillery, aviation, incendiary munitions and everything else, in the Russian arsenal, the invaders use conventionally prohibited means of warfare. The goal is not only to destroy, but also to inflict maximum physical damage.
I had one patient with a phosphorus injury. I took a piece of shrapnel out of his buttock. He already had a traumatic amputation, a high one of the lower limb. It is scary when smoke comes out of the wound. A person is burning alive. This fragment just comes into contact with oxygen and it catches fire. We got the fragment out, treated the wound, but it stopped smoking only during the said surgery. I took him to the operating room 3 or 4 times in a day. The 4th was the last time, and there was no more inflammation. The wound was cleared, and we evacuated him. Then doctors in the west of Ukraine treated and rehabilitated him. And now he plays for our Ukrainian national team at the Invictus Games. A person can adapt even after the most terrible injuries due to the level of medicine now in Ukraine as well.
I had not seen such amputations before, so that there were no arms, no legs. But now a lot. I haven't seen gas gangrene for a long time, and I've seen now. Realizing everything that the war brings today is a challenging task. It is very, very difficult to pass through all the thinking that can be. It changes yourself. And when our doctors visit the wounded and see them, it seems that all problems are nonsense. This is the problem, and everything else is not. Almost all of them survive only because they have all the medicines they need. There is equipment that supports their lives, and most importantly, there are specialists who already have experience. My colleague from Lithuania, who has a clinic, has just visited me. He wants doctors from Lithuania to have experience and come here. What I saw in one day I have not seen in my whole life, he said.
The 3rd Separate Assault Brigade is the best brigade.
On February 23, 2022, Dmytro Finashyn was in Popasna-Luhansk region with his brigade. The next day they were supposed to go to Stanica Luhanska. However, in the morning the plans changed. The commander woke the guys up with the words, "The war has begun." Dmytro's military specialty is a sniper, but during the war he had to do everything.
In fact, we have a universal army. Everyone does what is more useful at the moment. I was working with a drone, flying. When there were targets, we practiced sniping, for example. When there weren't, we worked as an assault group. For example, I was wounded during such assault. It happened when we went to the positions. It was near Soledar. They were only approaching Yakovlivka when very hard battles started. There was no understanding of where each army was at the moment. So we had to pass 3 kilometers across the gray zone. There was no one there. That is, we moved forward. Theoretically, no one should have been there, as aerial reconnaissance showed nothing. Moreover, no targets were found, no manpower or equipment was found. When we reached the next forest belt, we found an enemy already present.
He stepped on a mine. He stepped on a mine. We have wound it. We have wound it.
The unit retreated. There were 3 of them left: Dmytro, Sokrat, and Azovchik. After serving in the Azov regiment, he was given his call sign.
There is an exhibition. Please don't run, because I'll get caught and fall.
Behind was Finn. He also fired back with an assault rifle. As soon as I got up my knee, I got a bullet in my shoulder. But I realized that I was facing the enemy here. I was facing the enemy here. So the whole front line was with enemies. More than half of their directions were unavailable, and I definitely couldn't defeat them by myself. Same crap all the time. All the time.
Azovchik Oleksandr was wounded. My comrade and I started to evacuate him. There were 3 of us left. 1 wounded, 2 unharmed, me and Sokrat. We started the evacuation, later I got wounded, I mean my finger. Then an hour passes and I got a second injury.
I realized I was no longer the hardest wounded. Dmytro was even worse. He got 1 wound, then another, also very serious.
Now it will hurt. Be strong, all right?
Sokrat went forward to look for a way out, and he was killed. He died. They took his radio station and said that Sokrat was killed, and they killed all the other wounded. The Russians said they had killed all. That's why we lost positions.
It was a very difficult, psychological situation. It pressed on me, because you realized that there was little chance of survival, and the only person who could call for some help was killed. When I was wounded for the second time, and then Finn was injured, I understood that there was really no chance. It is likely that the armored personnel carrier will not get here.
In one moment, when I regained consciousness, I realized that there was no one there. I was already alone, it was very quiet. Just artillery was working tightly in that place. I looked to the right and took off the turnstile. I started looking for water, first of all, because the dehydration was terrible, I couldn't even move my tongue. I started looking for water, I found something there, it was a trace of water, almost dried up. Once upon a time a puddle dried up there, but still at least something. On the first night I tried to get out of the forest belt but lost consciousness. Hallucinations have already started. In addition, it was very cold, 4 degrees. I was all wet with blood and was freezing. This was on May 23rd. It was very hot during the day, I checked. The sun was burning, I think it was probably up to 30. I don't remember exactly, well, more than 25. Because it was really hot, and at night it was +4. It was a very big difference.
Wounded Dmytro spent 3 days in such conditions. He drank water from a dried up puddle and had no food. His wounded arm was also bothering him, so he decided to cut it off with a knife.
On the very first day I decided that I was going to die, because there was no chance of getting out. I simply did not believe in this situation. When I decided that I was going to die, that was probably the closest moment. And then I thought that I have to leave. I have to fight for life somehow. Since then I have not had such thoughts, but I had such an intense 2 days, just very intense. Both in terms of emotions and events. I was warming up for the second day. My arm didn't work at all. It was stiff and swollen, as big as my foot in diameter, and it disturbed me. I wanted to cut it off, but it did not work. I started with the finger, well, like when I crawl it and it hangs on the skin, just completely cut off, and he gets caught here in this direction, then in that direction. I looked at my hand, and the whole wound was in some kind of clay. In the grass everything was dirty. I think first of all it was very easy to catch some disease. Secondly, it disturbed me a lot, and all that was left was knife. I sat down, fixed the knife with my feet, and I started cutting this finger. I cut the skin, but I had no strength. The knife fell out. I put it back, I started cutting again. I saw that the bleeding had already started and the situation was very difficult. I realized that my bleeding was serious, and now it will be again. Moreover, I didn't have enough strength, so I decided not to aggravate the situation if I couldn't cut off my finger, which was hanging right on the skin. So how could I cut off my hand? Well, I didn't know what the real situation was, because I was wearing a tunic.
Azovchik tried to reach Ukrainian positions to call for help. He managed to get to the Bakhmut-Lysychansk road. In a few hours he was picked up by our military. First of all, he told his comrades the place where he remembered Dmytro was. But too much time had passed.
I really hoped that they would look for me, but in fact they found me by accident. They were looking for me with a drone, but again they didn't find anything. They saw a trace of trampled wheat. I was not supposed to survive. From a logical point of view, I shouldn't have been alive. In fact.
Our unit didn't find him. He was accidentally found by the 80th Brigade. They knew that there had been some kind of battle here, and only after 2 days they gathered their reconnaissance group to go and see what happened. They ran into Finn. He saw that the guys were in a Ukrainian pixel form. He was not so happy either, and also asked for something to drink. And he would go crazy from the taste of juice.
They carried me about 3 kilometers in a sleeping bag at first, then in tow. They carried me on belts from machine guns, and they brought me to the medics who were already with the car. As I was quite seriously wounded, they sent me to Dnipro. I went there to the Mechnikov hospital. At Mechnikov hospital, X-rayed, photo, analysis and other things were done immediately. When they cut off the cloth, they were terrified, saying that I got gangrene. In fact, when I was transported I smelled bad, it was just so terrible.
If a person wants to live, they will fight and help their body. If there is no one to support a person, of course their wounds heal badly.
4 months later, Dmytro Finashyn was awarded the title of Hero of Ukraine for his bravery. At first, the man was upset because he believed that there were guys who deserved the Gold Star more than him. Later, he found out that he had been nominated for the award posthumously. But the worst thing in the war, the defenders admit, is not the risk of injury or loss of life.
I walked through those ruined villages just broken. 1 or 2 houses could be for the whole village. You saw how people were living in a hurry. There were some photos, something else, photos on the walls. People could have lived there for generations in their parents' house, for example. And a moment comes and you have to leave. And you have nothing, it's scary. People's lives are broken. In a moment, click and that's it. Because someone decided that this will not be their territory and they can destroy everything here. It's terrible.
Thinking that I was dying, my goals, my views on life have changed, of course. They have become simpler. And in fact, what once seemed important no longer seemed so. Now, the most important thing, seems to me, is the return of my guys from captivity. At school, I read history textbooks about these wars, and I understand that in 50 years, children will also read and will be shocked by what happened.